This video is intended purely for scientific and educational purposes only. I am a professional. I have an NVQ and a BTEC. Do not attempt to recreate anything that you see in the video at home. Thank you.
I bought over 100 different king-size rolling papers to put them through their paces and find out which one is the best. Hello, I'm Uncle Haggy, and today we're going to be looking at perhaps the most famous rolling paper company of them all, Rizla. Now, I think this is a British thing only, but if someone asks you for a Rizla, it doesn't matter if you give them a raw, or an element, or a zigzag, or a blazy Susan, they're just looking for any sort of rolling paper. There are very few companies out there where the brand name is synonymous with the product category itself. It's something called genericide, or a proprietary eponym. Think Tupperware, or Jacuzzi, or Hoover, Kleenex, even AstroTurf. It's actually been a huge problem for me when I've been filming the other rolling paper reviews, and I had to redo so many takes because I would say Rizla instead of rolling paper. And I've only just broken the habit of saying that just in time for my video on Rizla. But that just goes to show how deeply embedded the brand is in the British lexicon. I don't think there's a more celebrated company in British counterculture than Rizla. From rave classics
now I was standing in the corner, searching for my Rizla,
to more modern drum and bass, to early UK hip hop, to grime music,
Roach, Rizla, Baki, Lemon,
from 70s reggae
give me little Rizla, yo,
to 2000s jungle,
pass me the wisdom,
and even Britpop, for crying out loud.
blue Rizla package.
I've got all the different king-size slim rolling papers that Rizla make. So I have the blues, the silvers, the microns, the precisions, the blacks, the Natura Hemps, some bamboo ones, and the quote classics, which on their website they're just called browns. They all have 32 leaves per booklet, except the blacks, which have 40. They're all produced in Belgium, and they all have an acacia gum strip, though they call it gum Arabic because in the past most acacia gum came from the Middle East and the name has stuck. They do make various other papers such as the famous cut cornered greens and the reds, but they only make them in a king size, not a king size slim. They also make some lesser known types such as some pinks, some oranges, and some whites, which all of them I've never seen out in the wild before. Some licorice flavored papers, which ooh, who the hell wants those? And they also make some thin seal papers, which are only available in Greece, and a yellow rice paper that you can only get in New Zealand. But they only make those other ones in your standard small size, so we won't be covering them today. And as my last video on elements, where I tested 6 different papers all in one go, was 38 minutes long, I will be splitting up this review on Rizla into 2 parts, and today we're going to be looking at the blues, the silvers, the microns, and the precisions. And like the elements, there is very little information about these papers on both the UK and international versions of Rizla's website. They have a tiny little bit more information on there than the elements did, but still, if you wanted to learn more about these papers, then the Rizla website isn't the place to go. And can we just take a moment to have a look at their UK website, because what graphic design knobhead made this awful, clashing, hard to read mess? I mean, look at it. It honestly gives me a headache being on here. But anyway, the blues are the thickest out of the lot, or what Rizla call thin, and on their website they describe the silvers as being extra thin, but then they also state both the microns and the precisions are extra thin too. But on the packaging of the precisions they say they are ultra thin papers. All of this is very confusing as they are not all the same thickness. The microns and the precisions I think are, but the silvers definitely sit in between those and the blues, as you will see when we start testing them. So why do I think they are the same thickness? While I don't know this for sure, it seems like the microns have been discontinued as there's no mention of them whatsoever on their UK website. They do mention them on the international version of their website though, so maybe they just stopped selling them here in the UK, because I seem to remember when they first came out about 10-15 years ago, they were absolutely everywhere and the marketing campaign behind them was pretty big. But these days you really don't see them around anymore, and now they've come out with these precisions which have the same sort of marketing behind them, so I think they replaced the microns with those. But we'll see if my theory is correct on that when we get round to testing the papers. All the papers we're looking at today have been bleached, and they're all made out of FSC mixed certified wood pulp. And looking on the Forest Stewardship Council website, that means it's made from a combination of certified wood, e.g. from a responsibly managed forest, recycled materials, and or controlled wood. Rizla makes this quite clear by putting the certificate on their packaging, and they mention it on their UK website. So I find it quite odd that if you were to Google what Rizla silvers or blues are made from, the AI AI thing at the top will tell you that they're made from a blend of rice and flax, otherwise known as linen. And it's not just the AI being sloppy here, as multiple websites that sell the papers will tell you the same thing. But from all the research that I've done, this just isn't correct at all. You don't get an FSC badge on your product if you don't use wood in your product. That's just how it works. So I wonder how this misconception got out there. It's true that the first part of the Rizla name, the Riz part, is the French for rice, as in the 1860s, the company started making rice rolling papers and wanted to reflect that in their branding. But that was over 160 years ago, and it seems like the only papers that Rizla make today that still have rice in them are these yellow rice papers that are sold exclusively for the New Zealand market. But moving on, the cheapest ones out of the whole lot were both the blues and the silvers, which cost me 65p per booklet, or about 2p per leaf, which is actually a really good price for a pack of Rizlas, as you'll be spending at least £1, if not £1.50 at your local Bossman's or supermarket to get them. The most expensive ones we're testing today are the Microns, which cost me 90p. So again, a really good price for a pack of Kings in my opinion, making them just under 3p per leaf. And the Precisions are 10p cheaper than that at 80p or 2.5p per leaf. So all around very respectable prices. Out of the ones we're looking at today, only the silvers have a combi option where you also get roach card with the papers, and they cost around about 50p to £1 more. Now the history of Rizla is a long one, so like the reviews, I'm going to split this story of this famous brand into two parts. So this is the official history of Rizla that appears on both the UK and international versions of their website. We start off in 1532, where we have the earliest documentation of the family name Lacroix dealing with any form of paper, when Pierre Lacroix trades some of his paper for a batch of high-end Périgord champagne. They don't make it clear if Pierre made the paper himself, though they do hint that he was somehow involved with the production of it. But the family didn't own its own paper mill until at least 1736, so most likely he was just some sort of trader. But then Rizla say in the 1660s, without the use of his own paper mill, Pierre came up with the idea to make paper specifically for smoking tobacco, as beforehand people would use either a fragile pipe or whatever scraps of paper they can get their hands on to smoke with. If you were paying attention to the years there, you might have thought I misspoke, but no, I didn't. In 1532, Pierre makes a trade, and in the 1660s, he then invents rolling papers. So according to Rizla, on both versions of their website, Pierre was, at the very least, 128 years old. And that's if he was born in the year he made the trade and then invented rolling papers bang on 1660. But moving on, the year is now 1796 and the company gets an offer from none other than Napoleon Bonaparte himself, and the company becomes an official licensed supplier of rolling papers to the French army. Though there isn't much time for this to have happened, as Napoleon was only made head of the French army in January of that year. He got married in March, and then 2 days later he goes off campaigning in Italy as part of the War of the First Coalition. So he most likely didn't have the time to make deals about rolling papers. But regardless, Rizla still puts this date on their packaging, which is slightly odd, as that would suggest that the company started in that year, but everything else Rizla tells you suggests that it was way earlier than that. But then comes the company we all know and love today, as they changed their name from the roll off your tongue Lacroix rolling paper company to Rizla and a plus sign. Like I said before, the first part, the Riz, is French for rice, but the second part, the and the cross, actually represents the family name, as LA is the first two letters of the name and Croix is the French word for cross. But this is where we get two separate timelines, as on the UK website it states this was done in the 1790s, and on the international version it states it was actually in 1866, and even different sources dispute the year in which this happened. On the company's wiki it states that this was in 1865, but in this Economist article it says it was actually in 1867, so really just a mess all round here. And to be honest, the whole official Rizla story stinks. Some aspects of it are true, sure, but in this same Economist article it states this about Rizla's official history. A museum in Algoland calls his historical fantasy and says that until 1860 the family manufactured paper but not for cigarettes. So to sum it up, almost all of Rizla's official story is a whole load of bollocks. But regardless of when or who or how, what they created turned out to be one of the most beloved brands of all time, with a logo that became a graphic design classic. But I will cover Rizla's cultural impact and their actual history in part 2. So we have a brand that is now owned by Imperial Tobacco, and they lie straight to your face. You're probably thinking, well, if I can't trust a tobacco company, who can I trust these days? But you know who doesn't lie to you? Me. Good old Uncle Haggy. So we're going to have a look at them, we're going to run some experiments, and then I'm going to give you my honest opinion about these papers. So first up, the looks of the packaging, and it seems like Rizla changed their design every other year. The Microns and the blacks, which we're not looking at today, I have some older designs, and I even remember seeing these packs like 10-15 years ago, so these Microns might be some vintage papers. And out of all the packs that I have, I like the look of the Microns the best, with its shiny look and those blue waves. They just look a lot more classy than the other books. The blues and the silvers I think have recently gone through a redesign, as I spotted these blue kings at Tesco's the other day that are different and even say they have a new look and feel to them. Even though the packs that I have, the older design, also say they have a new look and feel to them. But we'll focus on the design of the packs that I bought for the review, as I actually like the older ones more. Not that I'm a huge fan of the design, I don't like this sort of hand-drawn font they use on some of the words, like this blatant lie here, and the back is just a mess. But I'm a sucker for an embossed logo, and doubly for one that's metallic. That and the added outline of it really makes it pop out at you, and I also like the gradient colour of the background. Also, I really like the feel of the packaging itself, as it almost has a silicone touch to them that makes them quite satisfying to hold for some reason. And let's not forget about the green card, which is added to help with strengthening the pack, but is the best emergency roach card ever, even though you have to ruin the pack to get them out. The Precisions have a little bit more going on with these metallic triangles that form hexagons that look like they're from some sort of video game like the last couple of Deus Exes, but is actually a little nod to the design of the watermark on the papers, but we'll get to that, and we start off by weighing them up. I will get all the papers out, remove the green card and the warning leaf, and put all 32 papers on these milligram scales. Starting off with the blues, and they come in at 2,442 milligrams, and if we put that into an AI chatbot and ask it to give us a gram per square meter measurement, that comes in at 16.06 GSM. And just a quick note, normally a GSM measurement that you get from a company doesn't include the gum, but it's not like I can weigh them up without the sticky, so just keep that in mind. Next up, the silvers, and they are just over 200 milligrams lighter at 2.215 grams, or about a gram and a half off the GSM of the blues at 14.57 grams. Moving on to the Microns, and they come in at a nice round 2.1 grams, or 13.81 grams per square meter. And lastly, the Precisions, and they weigh 2,132 milligrams, giving us a GSM weight of 14.02. So while they are 32 milligrams more than the Microns per pack, that is well within the margin of error, and I would say they are still pretty much the same thickness. But the last two results actually shocked me a little bit, as these are apparently the thinnest papers that Rizla make, and they are way heavier than I thought they were going to be. I've only tested a few papers so far, but we have the Phantoms from Elements and the unbleached zigzags that beat these Microns pretty convincingly, being 291 and 118 milligrams lighter, or 13.86% and 5.62% less heavy respectively. And when we do the Calliper Test, both the Microns and the Precisions come in at 1.2 millimeters, which again doesn't really meet my expectations of these being what Rizla call ultra thin papers. But moving on, we now do the blues, and they are 1.5 millimeters, and the silvers, which are 1.4 millimeters. Now we're going to see how transparent the papers are, and we're going to have a look at the watermarks. I'll use my phone torch and put it underneath the paper, and the more light we see, the thinner the paper is. And we can see that the blues actually let a surprising amount of light through, and we can see their spell out logo detailing watermark. I can't imagine there's any other reason they added it other than branding purposes, but I've always been a sucker for the Rizla logo, so I quite like it. Now I will place my fingers underneath them to see if my hands are visible, again giving us clues on how thick the paper is. And the blues are quite opaque, and they block out my fingers somewhat. Next up, the silvers, and of course they let more of the light through than the blues, but the jump wasn't as big as I expected. But putting my fingers underneath them, we actually see there's a huge amount of difference, and my hands are quite visible. And these too have a spell out logo watermark, but along with it we have a big roundel that has half a sun in it and says not just okay papers, not all right papers, but quality papers. Now we move on to the Microns, and they let loads of the light through, and my hands are quite clearly seen underneath the paper. And these too have a spell out logo in the watermark along with the name of the papers themselves, but this is where we see a pattern that might actually have a purpose when you're smoking them, as there are these little wavy lines running horizontally across the paper. What does it do exactly? Well, I can't seem to find any information about this particular pattern that Rizla has used, but generally watermarks like this are added to help with airflow when smoking to try and achieve an even even burn, but we will see if that's the case when we roll one up. And lastly, we have the precisions, and incredibly similar to the Microns with the amount of light and my fingers being quite clearly visible underneath them, but we do see a totally different watermark this time. We see little separate triangles that form hexagons, just like the ones that we saw on the packaging, and big diamonds with a spell out logo in the middle of them. When I first saw it, for a moment it looked like the Raw and Elements watermark, the one that I covered in the last rolling paper review. And there are some similarities, as you do get the same sort of lines that intersect at 90 degrees from one another, but you have other lines that are formed going vertically and horizontally across the paper. And it isn't the watermark that forms the line, it's the actual paper, which is unlike the Raw and Elements pattern, as it's the watermark that creates those lines. And like the Microns, there is very little information about the watermark's claimed benefits, but I really doubt this is because it just looks cool, and Rizla must have some sort of reasoning behind why they designed it. But moving on, we're now going to see how strong the papers are. I would tug on each paper on each axis 6 times to see if they rip, and if they do, that could mean you might have to be delicate when using them. But as you can see, none of them did, so they all pass. And now we're going to test the gum strip, where I will attach one paper to another, wait 30 seconds, and then pull on the paper 3 times on each side to see if the sticky holds up. And we have the blues, the Microns, and the precisions that all didn't rip, but the silvers did. But I think I was being just a little bit too rough with them compared to the others, and it was only a small bit on the bottom, so the sticky still survived, so they all pass. So now we will test the pH of these papers to see how pure they are. I will fill up this beaker with 30 ml of deionized water and pop this pH tester into it, and the water is showing 6.72. Next, I will put in 3 papers from the same pack, give it a little stir, and then let it sit there for a minute, and then pop the meter back in. And first up, the blues, and we get a reading that is actually quite a lot higher than the water at 8.75. And we've seen this before with thicker papers, with the zigzag blues being about half a pH more, and the element hemps coming up 1.5 more alkali than the water was. And my theory is whatever they used to bleach the papers is still lingering on them. But I have done some further research into the matter, and it turns out the most likely culprit is an additive. Rolling paper and tobacco manufacturers have been adding compounds like calcium carbonate, magnesium carbonate, and titanium dioxide to their products for years now, and they all have pHs that are more alkaline than the water. Now, they do this for a few different reasons. Firstly, it makes the ash of whatever you're smoking appear more white, as you can see here with the zigzag blues that we tested in my first review video after we burnt them. This is done to trick people into believing that their products are more pure than others, as a big thing, especially in the cannabis community, is the belief that a white ash is purer and maybe even better for you than darker coloured ash. It also makes the paper whiter itself. So while these additives aren't bleaching agents, they kind of serve the same purpose to make the paper appear more white than it actually is. And lastly, adding these compounds apparently helps to get a more consistent smoke to prevent running, and it helps to keep the ash cling together, again giving you the impression of a purer, better smoke. Some of you at home might be thinking, what are these nasty chemicals that they're adding to my rolling papers? Well, more than likely you've actually consumed all 3 of these compounds today, unless you've just woken up. Titanium dioxide is just white food colouring and is added to loads of different things like sunscreen, cosmetics, chewing gum, dairy products, and a bunch of other stuff. And magnesium and calcium carbonate is pretty much used in anything you can think of and is found in nature all the time, like in chalk or eggshells. If you brushed your teeth, had an antacid, taken a supplement, drunk oat or soya milk with added calcium. Hell, even if you've eaten anything grown on a farm, as both compounds are used as agricultural lime to neutralize acidic soils. Now, does that make these compounds safe to smoke? Well, actually, nothing is truly safe to smoke anyway. But are these chemicals worse for you than anything else that you normally find in smoke? There is very limited information in that regard, but in this incredibly detailed and highly recommended High Times article on the use of calcium carbonate in rolling papers, it states this: the material safety data sheet of calcium carbonate does classify it as a potential respiratory tract irritant. A National Institute of Health study of autopsies in smokers versus non-smokers also found that the elemental components of calcium carbonate are found in the lungs of smokers but not in non-smokers, meaning it could potentially leave residue particles in your lungs. So probably not that good then, and something you might want to avoid. And you can apparently do that with these silvers, as we got a reading that was much closer to the water at 6.38. Like I previously mentioned in my other review videos, a reading that is slightly lower than the water is normal, as the acacia gum strip is acidic. But while the silvers seem to be more pure than the blues are, they still have the lowest pH so far out of all the papers I've tested. I know I haven't tested that many papers as of yet, but But when we did the elements last time, all of them, except the hemps, were about 0.1 to 0.2 more acidic than the water. But these Rizlas are almost double that at 0.34. But then comes the Microns, which was slightly lower at 6.35, therefore taking the crown of the most acidic papers that we've looked at so far. And lastly, we have the Precisions, which are a little higher than the last two and comes in at 6.42. Still a little bit less than most of the other papers that I've tested in the past, but really, in the grand scheme of things, all the papers we just tested, barring the blues, are pretty much pure. But I just wanted to quickly test the blues again, as like the last two times I got a result that had a big variance compared to the others, I was a little concerned that I might have got a bad reading. But like the last two times this happened, I needn't have bothered and we got a very similar reading of 8.69. But I do have this newer pack of Rizla blues and I was wondering if they would give us a different reading for any reason. But they don't, and we get a reading of 8.67. So all the blues we tested are pretty much in the same range. Now I remember a little while ago a friend telling me that he would roll with Rizla blues instead of the silvers because the silvers have been bleached with chlorine and the blue ones haven't and are therefore more pure. And I've heard other people saying this too. And while it might be true that the silvers have been bleached with chlorine, from all the testing we've done, it's not like any of the chlorine is still on the paper, as chlorine has a really high pH, which was why I thought it might have been a bleaching agent that was causing the higher pHs on the papers that we've tested so far. So it seems to be a misconception that the blues are somehow purer than the silvers. We move on to the burn test, where I will stand a paper on its end in this tray, set it on fire with a match and film it with a slow-mo function on my phone so I can count the frames and get an accurate time to see how long they last. The faster the burn, the thinner the paper is, and then in turn that means you get a slower burn rate when you actually roll up with it. We start off with the blues and we have times of 11.917, 11.617 and 11.85 seconds, giving us an average of 11.794 seconds. And now the silvers, and the three times are 11.22, 11 on the dot and 11.183 seconds, making the average 11.134 seconds. So not that much faster than the blues, as they were only 0.66 seconds quicker. Next up we have the Microns, and they come in at 9.733, 10.45 and 10.083 seconds, meaning the average is 10.089 seconds, or just over a whole second less than the silvers. And last up, the Precisions, and the times were 10.4, 10.833 and 9.75 seconds, giving us an average of 10.328 seconds. So very similar to the Microns, but just ever so slightly longer. And now we're going to look at what was left behind after the burn test. And again, we start off with the blues, which obviously leave the most ash behind, but if we can compare them to the zigzag blues from my first review video, there was considerably less ash. I know the zigzag blues were just over 100 milligrams heavier, but it's very surprising the difference we see between them. But we do see that the ash that was left behind is looking very grey to white looking, furthering my belief that these papers have got some sort of additive in them. And the differences we see between the silver and the Rizla blues is even bigger, and really the only ash left behind from the silvers is from the gum strips. But we do see a huge bit of paper that didn't ignite, which is never a good sign, as this could mean an uneven burn when smoking. Now we have the Microns, and while we do see there is a little less ash than the silvers, there really isn't that much difference between them, and again we do see a few bits of paper that didn't burn. And lastly we have the Precisions, which are incredibly similar to the Microns with the amount of ash left behind, but this time we don't get any unburnt bits of paper. And now for the last test, and I'm going to roll up a completely not dodgy, 100% legal tobacco king size rollie with a roach, wink wink, so I can see what they like to roll up with, how they smoke, and any other things that come to my mind when I'm actually using the papers. And we're going to start off with the blues.
It's me, Uncle Haggy, hello! Now this should go without saying, but these papers are incredibly easy to roll up with. They feel nice and strong when you're actually using them in the hand, and they have that nice grippy feel that I look out for in the paper. But these do feel a lot smoother in the hand when you can compare them to, say, the zigzag blues that I tested in my first video. Could that be that these papers have more additives in them than the zigzags? Well, when we did the pH test, it certainly suggests that, and it kind of makes sense that that might be the case, as these have an almost chalky feel to them, and calcium carbonate is essentially just pure chalk. Now, it's not like I'm holding a chalk stick or something like that, you know, like the ones that you'll draw a hopscotch game with, as there's no residue coming off it, and they aren't as smooth, or a better word would be glossier, than an unbleached wood pulp paper is. But compared to most other rolling papers that are around about the same thickness than these Rizla blues, they are just a lot smoother than any of those are. And given these are the thickest paper out of the Rizla collection of king size slim papers, and the fact that they probably have some sort of additive in them that keeps the ember hotter, these do have quite a quick burn rate. If you're a big full-on toker like I am and you don't pay attention to the cherry, it can get quite hot, which in turn can affect the evenness of the burn and the flavour of it too. Saying that though, I have been quite pleasantly surprised with how evenly these do burn when you don't get the cherry too hot, as they don't have a watermark to help with that. They don't burn as evenly. Oh, this is a drug deal going on here. Yeah, have a look at that. They don't burn as evenly as the Elements I tested last time, which does have a watermark to help keep it even. And yeah, you do have to keep an eye on it if the cherry does get too hot and then micromanage it with a quick burst of a lighter on the affected side, but I expected it to be a way bigger problem than what it turned out to be. I've also been surprised that, considering how thick they are, they don't have that much of a papery taste to them. Comparing them again to the Zigzag Blues, I think these Rizlas blow them out of the water in terms of taste, and they're actually a lot more comparable to the Zigzag Silvers that we tested, even though those are actually quite a bit lighter. And lastly, these papers do have quite a nice throat hit to them. And now we move on to the silvers. Right, here we are, back at it again, and I got a silver right here ready to go. So like the blues, these papers are actually very easy to roll up with. The blues are obviously easier, and if you're just getting into rolling, I would stick with them for now. But if you're ready to make the jump for a thinner paper, but you're also a little bit worried about it, then I think these Rizlas are probably your best bet. And again, like the blues, these are some quite smooth papers, but they don't feel as chalky as the blue ones. They feel a little bit more glossy, but these are still way more grippy than what a wood pulp paper would be, and I think they found a sweet spot in between being too matted and being too glossy. Unlike the blues though, the burn rate and the flavour you get from them are considerably better, and you're not getting a papery taste with them at all while keeping that nice throat hit. But I am getting some uneven burn issues with these papers. Now this could be down to loads of different factors other than the papers themselves, and I don't think I've done anything massively different than what I normally do when I've been skinning up. I'm not saying it's been particularly bad, but if you're not paying attention, you might end up wasting a lot of your cigarette to try and fix it. But does adding a watermark to an even thinner paper help with that uneven burn issue? Well, let's have a look at the Microns. Right, back once again, and I got a Micron right here ready to go. Now in the hands they feel incredibly similar to the silvers, but maybe just ever so slightly more glossy. But it's so close that if I was blindfolded and I had both of them in my hands, I probably wouldn't be able to tell them apart. I know they weren't that much lighter than the silvers were. I think it was like 100 milligrams or so, but with a rolling paper a little goes a long way, so I'm actually quite surprised with how alike these papers are. If you're comfortable strapping up with a silver and you wanted to move on to something a little bit more fancy, then I think these Microns are a good bet. And these seem to be burning at a lot slower rate than the silvers did, and by quite a noticeable margin. I don't know if it's the wavy watermark that's helping out in that regard, or the fact they are just lighter. But if you wanted a slower burning paper without sacrificing on the ease of rolling, then these Microns are for you. But even with this slower burn rate, I haven't actually really noticed that much of a change in the flavour at all, and I wouldn't say they were any better than the silvers are. And again, I don't know if the watermark is helping out in this regard, but we do seem to be getting a lot better even burn with these Microns than both the blues and the silvers. And I haven't had to micromanage it nearly as much as I did those two, and it's still got a nice throat hit to boot. But do these new precisions, which are the same thickness but have a different watermark, change the smoke at all? Well, we're going to have a look and find out. Here I am back at my little spot, and I've just sparked up a precision. So this is odd. Even though these are 32 milligrams heavier than the Microns when we weighed them up, these precisions for some reason feel more lightweight when you got them in the hand, even though we know they're not. Maybe lightweight isn't the best way to describe it, but when you're holding them, they just feel and look more delicate than the Microns did, and I think that's down to two different reasons. Firstly, they feel a lot more glossy than the Microns did, and secondly, I think the watermark makes them look more translucent, as you can see here with some photos that I took with the papers over my camera battery. There's not much in it, but I think this gives the illusion of the precisions being thinner. Therefore, I feel like I have to be extra careful when using them, as they just feel weaker and more fragile, even though they didn't rip when we did the strength test. So with that and the lack of grip, I think these papers are actually harder to roll with than the Microns were. And as we saw with the burn test, the times are really similar, and with the few that I've smoked so far, I'm not noticing any major differences between the burn rate, the flavour, or the throat hit of them at all. The only major differences between these and the Microns, apart from the fact that they're harder to roll with, is that they seem to be burning just a little bit more evenly. Not by much though, and I think these papers have a lot more in common with one another than differences. I didn't say this in the Micron smoke test, but as these papers seem to be burning at the same rate, I'll say it here. While the burn rate of both the papers are better than the silvers, they actually burn quite quickly when you can compare them to all the other elements that I did in my last video, and even the zigzag unbleached papers that I did in my first review. So for Rizla to market these papers as ultra thin and slow burning when the zigzags are about a third of the price and are thinner and last longer loses quite a few marks in my eyes. So that's half of the Rizla papers now tested, and I'm going to go back inside because it's bloody cold.
Right, back here in the studio, and normally this is where I would go through the pros and cons of each of the papers, but as I fear this video is probably going to be a little bit too long, I'm going to save that for part 2 of my Rizla review. So if that video isn't out yet, you can keep your eyes peeled by subbing to the channel and turning on notifications. And actually, even if the next part is out and you enjoyed the video, please do that too, and maybe even give us a like, as it would really go a long way to help us grow the channel and I can make more content for you guys. So if my second Rizla rolling paper review is out, you can watch it right here. But if it isn't out, it'll just be a different video. And here is my previous rolling paper review video where we go for the brand Elements and we test all their king size slim rolling papers, just like what we did in this video. Thank you so much for watching. It actually means a lot to me if you made it this far. I've been Uncle Haggy. Take it easy. Until next time.